Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the San Francisco Roundtable Technical Working Group for January 17. I would like to call to order the January 17, 2023 SFO Airport Community Roundtable Technical Working Group at 4 p.m. And we are meeting via Zoom. And join us today are staff to the Roundtable, Kathleen Wentworth, Roundtable Coordinator, Angela Montez, Roundtable Administrative Secretary, Eugene Reindale, HMMH Technical Consultant to the Roundtable. We also have with us Lisa Osasa, Deputy Director, Planning and Building Department, County of San Mateo, Linda Wallen, Senior Legislative Aide to Supervisor Dave Pine, Bert Ganong, SFO Airport Noise Office Manager, Paul Hanna, Consultant Chief Airspace and Flight Operation Engineer, SFO, and Christian Valdez, Senior Managing Consultant, SFO. And with us from the FAA, I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen to tell me who we have with us.
At this time, we have SFO Roundtable Co-Chair Al Royce, and I don't see anyone from the FAA. And okay. Christian Valdez, if you didn't say, is here with Paul Hanna.
Okay, wonderful. So if we didn't miss anybody else, I'm moving on to roll call, please.
Chair Hindi.
Present.
Member O'Connell.
Present.
Member Ortiz. Member Ortiz, not present. You have a quorum, sir.
Thank you, and welcome Vice Chair Royce. Thank you for being with us. All right, with that, I'm gonna go ahead and move to next item, which is public comments for items that are not on the agenda. This would be the time for members of the public who would like to address the technical working group on items that are not on the agenda. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Ms. Montez.
Thank you, Chairman Hindi. For those attending the meeting on the Zoom video conference, we will use the raise hand feature in order to organize any public comments. During the general public comment periods, I will ask those members of the public who wish to comment to click the raise hand feature to speak on that agenda item. For those joining by phone, please press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. When you hear your name called, I will prompt you to unmute your microphone and inform you that you may begin speaking. You will have 2 minutes. And Chairman, I do see one hand raised from Ms. Darlene Yapley, and in the attendees, I also see Member Ann Schneider for the record. I will promote her to panelist shortly, but I will first call on Darlene Yapley.
Okay, and Member Taylor as well is in the attendees.
Okay, 1 second. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up my timer now. Ms. Yapley?
At the October 5th Roundtable meeting, I made a comment on the critical and consequential gap between the Roundtable's April GBS motion and the San Francisco Airport's subsequent October 5th reporting plan. The motion mandates the GBAS robust monitoring to include both average and single events with the reports rendered on a regular basis. In contrast, on October 5th, SFO stated it was going to report comparisons of only averages, not single events. Although SFO is going to list single events, this is not the same as providing a report comparing single event GLS to single event non-GLS to determine if a procedure is noisier or not. Remember, the whole point of doing monitoring is to determine if the noise is worse or not with the new GBS procedure. And consequently, if it is worse, SFO is committed to decommissioning the GBAS procedure. The critical and consequential gap between the Roundtable motion and the SFO plan is not isolated to Palo Alto only. The reporting and its methodology applies to all GBAS procedures that impact SFO Roundtable communities as well as non-SFO Roundtable communities. Therefore, the roundtables will want to know if a GBAS procedure is louder than without GBAS by applying an accurate single event to single event comparison, not averages. In order to comply with the roundtable motion and perform a rigorous comparison, single events must be reported. To clarify, I've recently emailed SFO with the question, will SFO report single event data that will compare GLS flights to non-GLS flights to comply with the roundtable motion on April 6th? If an affirmative reply is available, I ask that we proceed. And if not, I ask the TWG to agendize this topic for a future meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yapley. And with that, Chairman, we do not have any more hands raised for item not on the agenda.
Thank you, Angela. If you wouldn't mind, I see Member Schneider and the attendees.
Yes, I have attempted to promote her along with Member Taylor. Member Taylor has joined, but I'm not sure if, oh, here comes Member Schneider. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, with that, moving on to the agenda on item 1 and 2, the consent agenda. We will move on to set the agenda and approve the consent as well, which includes item 2. Item 2 is a resolution adopting findings for remote meetings. Staff will note, but not read any written comments and allow members of the public to speak. Ms. Montes, back to you.
Thank you, Chairman. As a reminder, if you wish to speak, you may raise your hand through Zoom or press *9 if you are calling by phone. But Chairman, we do not have any public comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I have not received any requests from any members of the roundtable to pull anything out of the consent. If anybody has an item would like to be pulled, please let me know. Otherwise, I will entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion to approve the agenda and consent items.
Thank you, Member O'Connell. I need a second.
That
I
would
will
be
go
you,
ahead and
Mr.
second
Chair.
it. I will go ahead and second it. Kathleen, roll call, please.
Chair Hindi,
Yes.
Member O'Connell,
Yes.
and Member Ortiz is absent. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you so much. Moving on to item number 3, initial feedback on SFO roundtable suggested GLS procedures. And with us from SFO is Mr. Paul Hanna. Paul, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having us here again. Before I get into the presentation, Chair Hindi, would you like us to potentially have one of our team members address the question that came from right at the outset of our presentation here about the single event comparison?
Absolutely. If you have an answer for it, by all means.
I was going to pass the microphone to Christian. Go ahead, Christian. Sorry.
Thanks, Paul. This question about single event noise levels and averages has come up before. And the GBAS team has put answers on the Q&A section of the website, of the GBAS website. So perhaps I could clarify it a little bit more tonight. So during the monitoring period, we'll capture every single event, single flyover over the microphones. And the microphones will capture 2 single event metrics, the sound exposure level, SEL, and LMAX, and has a GLS group of aircraft and a non-GLS group of aircraft. We'll be able to compare the average SEL levels and average LMAX as a group. When GLS aircraft fly over the microphones and even non-GLS approaches, there will be a high level and a low level. So there will be a range of noise levels. And all of those noise levels will be listed as single events in our report, but it has a group, has a GLS approach group and a non-GLS approach group. Both of them will be compared, and we'll see that we'll try to show that the GLS approaches are quieter than the non-GLS approaches.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Valdez. I appreciate that. Paul, before I turn it back to you, let me kind of set up item number 3 a little bit to kind of bring a little bit of history and a little bit of introduction, if you will. As you all know, the SFO GBAS team continues to work towards future quieter SFO flight arrival procedures. And at our last technical working group meeting in November and at the regular roundtable meeting in December, the roundtable considered and submitted 10 suggestion concepts to the SFO GBAS team for their review. Let me first start by thanking and acknowledging the SFO and SFO GBAS team for their rapid processing and analysis of those 10 roundtable suggestions. That was phenomenal. So thank you, Paul, and your team again. The processing involved a great deal of technical analysis, research, and discussion to analyze each roundtable suggestion to provide today's agenda's item number 3, the initial feedback, which I had mentioned. Their hard work and commitment are much appreciated. We understand that the use of GBAS arrival procedure is limited by nature of the GBAS program design to any concept's ability to successfully interact with existing flight procedures, as well as, which is a very important part, FAA regulations and processes. With that, Paul, it's all yours.
That's a wonderful setup. Thank you, Chair Hindi. And thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this technical working group. I'm going to share my screen, and what I'm going to present is a copy of the materials that we sent out as a part of the handout ahead of today's meeting. So I'm going to put this into presentation mode. And just as a quick sanity check, I hope you all can see the presentation the way it's intended and you're not looking at a notes screen. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you so much. I know that happens to all of us from time to time. So what we'd like to cover for today's topic on the feedback, in particular for the roundtable suggested procedures, is actually kind of 3 things. So the first part of our presentation that we're going to go over is some of the feedback that we collected from our flight procedures subcommittee that's supporting the San Francisco International Airport GBAS project team. This is the group of industry experts. So it's airlines, it's FAA, it's representatives from the GBAS manufacturer themselves, it's aircraft manufacturers who have been spending tremendous amounts of time helping us to succeed to achieve our project goals here, which is, potential noise reduction, looking for ILS redundancy, looking for opportunities to enhance efficiency, and looking for opportunities to reduce delays. And your suggestions from the roundtable, and in particular this technical working group, they were inventive, they were fantastic. We're really excited to look at them. The only challenge we ran into is that our flight procedure subcommittee kind of meets kind of every other month, and sometimes on a monthly basis. So we've had one kind of half opportunity for our flight procedure subcommittee to take a look at the materials that were presented. So we're going to be presenting a lot of feedback based on that first evaluation that came from our technical subject matter experts. We have another meeting coming up this month where we're going to be diving into more details on a couple of the procedures that we think are great candidates to take forward as part of what we call Group 2A procedures. So we're going to be spending the first part of our presentation talking about that. The second thing we'd like to talk about today is the process about how we would like to implement those Group 2A procedures, and talk about an equally important issue, which is increasing utilization. But when I use that phrase, what we're talking about is increasing utilization for GLS approach procedures that are meeting our project goals. And I'm really grateful to Christian for giving that initial response. We are going to talk about that a little bit. So that second part of our discussion here today is going to talk about kind of process going forward, both for what we're looking at in terms of possible Group 2A concepts for exploration with you and other members and of other noise forums and roundtables and residents of the Bay Area, but also what that looks like for how we would go about identifying those procedures that might be working very well and increasing their utilization beyond just GLS capable airplanes. And then the last thing we'll cover is kind of our next steps, to take just a quick tactical look at what we're thinking about for our next opportunity to speak with all of you. So the first thing I'm going to cover is our feedback. Again, this is all information that has been gathered from our flight procedure subcommittee. I'm very proud to be, the person who's going to be presenting some of this to you all, but it's a huge collection of folks who have these opportunities to put their minds to it. So really excited to share some of this feedback with you here. So this is just a very high level summary, kind of with a few sentences about what we kind of gathered from the 10 concepts that were submitted to our team to take a look at. So we do think that there are a few concepts that can move forward as Group 2A procedures for exploration. And what that means is that the concepts can be explored without kind of significant need for additional criteria to come into existence, like significant instrument procedure design criteria or significant changes to what a GBAS can or can't do, which means that they have a very good likelihood of potentially being designed and flown. Now we still need to take that important step to evaluate it with all of you and members of residents of the Bay Area. But there isn't necessarily like a huge kind of technological or staffing blocker that might prevent their use as intended. So I think that's exciting. We'll talk about which procedures of those that we're looking at here in just a few moments. We did take a look at some of the suggested concepts that involved what we kind of refer to as a tie-in directly to two of the existing stars. And I think there were a couple of concepts. Some of them were direct tie-ins to the Pirate star. Others were direct tie-ins to the Bodega star, but specifically to some of the tracks that have traditionally come down the west side of, or down the kind of over many of the southern Bay cities. So I think that's sometimes referred to as Bodega West. That's not the official term. That's just a term I think many people use. So we did take a look at that. Unfortunately, right now, in terms of Group 2A procedures, there are some ATC automation constraints that are going to prevent them from being considered in 2A. So they're good ideas. They could possibly be explored as a part of this GBAS project, but right now there are certain limitations that move them into a slightly more future state, like Group 2B or 3. There were two suggestions that kind of separate from the Pirate and the Bodega that are, when we had a chance to review them with our flight procedure subcommittee members, they were considered to be beyond the scope of the GBAS project. It doesn't mean they're a bad idea. It just means that they're beyond kind of our ability to work across all of our stakeholders to implement them, either as a 2A or 2B or potentially a 3 concept, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And there was one suggestion, a very creative one, which unfortunately can't proceed at this time. Again, can't be a Group 2A procedure, but it has to do with some other safety issues that are being encountered at other airports that have tried similar ideas. And those safety issues are being addressed right now in real time. So, in order for our team to get meaningful information in front of all of you, that last concept is something that we can't, we couldn't likely explore this year because we need to wait to see what the FAA determinations are. And that one in particular has to do with, changing up how simultaneous approaches might work for 2A left and 2A right. The last thing I want to point out, and again, we're going to go into this in more detail, is that when we talk about increased utilization, which is a phase, it's an actual phase of our strategic plan for the GBAS here, there could be an opportunity to explore working with the Northern California TRACON through a possible update to the letter of agreement that would prioritize nighttime arrival and approach operations into SFO using perhaps some of these overwater concepts that we'd like to explore with all of you as Group 2A procedures. So that may be a possible mechanism that we can explore in the future. And I just kind of want to point that out because what this means is that some of these Group 2A concepts, if they're found to be favorable, if we get positive feedback from the community that we should go forward and ask the FAA to develop them, there are possibilities that in the near term, meaning kind of 2025, 2026 time range, where some of these concepts could be explored and implemented to potentially achieve our project goals more broadly. So what we have here on slide 5 is a table that kind of summarizes all 10 of the concepts. And what we're showing here is the numerical kind of concept over here on the left, which is the suggested procedure. So the first procedure number 1, and then 2 A, B, and C, 3 A, B, C, etc. And then we have the description of the procedure. Now, this is how we kind of, as a flight procedure subcommittee, are describing these concepts. This is not necessarily the exact phrasing that came forward. So apologies if there's something there that maybe looks a little bit disconnected, but I'll do my best to explain those as we go through. The GBAS project team feedback column, which is this third column right here where I'm kind of moving my mouse. This is our kind of quick categorization of whether we think this concept can be explored through our Group 2A process, which is what we're going to be doing this year, or our Group 2B or 3 process, which is in the future, not something we're doing right now with the public, but something that we would plan to do in the future. Whether it's beyond the scope of the GBAS project, which is kind of like number 4 and 5 down here, or number 6, which is the one where we're waiting on some additional FAA exploration into safety issues. Again, safety issues that have not been encountered here necessarily at SFO, but safety issues that are being encountered at other airports where they've tried something similar. And they're just working through that process right now. The next steps column that we see here on the far right side is what our flight procedure subcommittee would like to do with these suggestions. So when you see a green row, those are the 3 kind of suggested procedures that right now we are planning to take forward into the Group 2A process. And what that means is we are planning to run those through the full kind of targets and GPD analysis, which are the instrument procedure design tools available to our subcommittee. We're going to do the noise analysis on those, and we're going to convert all that into community flight procedure packages, just like we did for Group 1. And our plan right now is to make those Group 1 procedures available via the noise.flysfo.com website on the GBAS tab, probably in late February. And then we'd like to come back here to the March Technical Working Group meeting and walk all of you and anybody else who has a chance to participate here through those packages. That would be like your first kind of public opportunity to discuss them with us and ask any questions. So the 3 that we're going to be looking at, we're going to talk about all 10 here in some detail here today, but just so you know, the 3 concepts is the first suggestion is what we call the down the bay to the RMP Yankee. That is the suggestion to kind of build upon the down the bay innovative Group 1 GLS procedure, which will be published if the schedule holds this year on the 30th of November, and look at whether or not there's an ability to transition that aircraft onto the RNP Yankee path to basically keep that aircraft just a little bit further away from the south side of the bay. And as it turns out, it may be possible from an instrument procedure design. This is something we're looking at kind of from the flight procedure subcommittee in a bit more detail. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So it's an interesting concept, and I think we all collectively think it could go to Group 2A. The other concept that we're very interested in exploring are basically 2 variations with the 2B concept and the 3B concept for what we're calling like a slight modification to the existing RNP Yankee approach, which is currently being worked on by the FAA to convert into the GLS uniform procedure. And you don't need to worry about this. We're going to show the graphics. And then a more aggressive modification. So these 2 recommendations both are of the nature of trying to, in particular in the nighttime operation, look for opportunities to keep the aircraft high over kind of the populated areas until they cross over the bay, and then utilize that time over the bay to continue the rest of the descent, slow down, and get configured for landing. That's what the RNP Yankee was kind of always meant to do. So these are kind of even more, in some cases, more aggressive or slightly longer or higher possibilities on how to achieve that same outcome. So those are 2 things that we're going to be looking at as Group 2A concepts. The rest of these I'm going to talk about here in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go through one by one and talk about them, and then we'll get back to that same table again here in just a second. So on this particular slide, the first one we've got is what we're terming the down the bay to RNP Yankee, or down the bay to GLS uniform. On the right-hand side of the screen, I'm still using the image that was provided to us in the information package that was kindly submitted along with your ideas, partly because it was a great, very informative graphic, and partly because our subcommittee is still working through what exactly these procedures will look like in targets. And so I don't have those targets screen shared available for you just yet. We have to go through a process with our subcommittee before I can bring those forward. So when we come back in March, if that's something we can do, we will have both the community flight procedure packages that have the more detailed kind of ground track, along with the 3D perspective, and we can share all of that then. So I'm just using kind of the original graphics that Kathleen and others prepared, and really appreciate those. So we call this the down the bay to RNP Yankee, or down the bay to GLS uniform. The key concept is it's the same initial approach path that starts around the new waypoint that's being proposed of D-Bay. It comes down the water, it turns before the aircraft gets, in principle, too close to aircraft arriving on runway 30 into Oakland. And instead of following the red path, which is generically the one that's being developed by the FAA right now, again, this is kind of an instrument procedure version of an existing vector maneuver. The idea is to try and find a path where the aircraft can essentially turn to Dong DO, this waypoint right here that I'm circling with my mouse, this is the existing waypoint used for the RMP Yankee approach. This is technically the PFAF. So as the aircraft would complete a slightly more aggressive turn, and we're exercising a little bit of creative latitude over in this overwater stretch as a subcommittee to figure out what works best in terms of aircraft separation. We would view this as maybe like the nighttime version of the down the bay approach to just see if there's even more kind of potential noise benefit that could be gained from this path. So we've taken this into targets in GPD. The kinds of turns that would be necessary to have the aircraft get to dawn result in about a 25-degree bank angle. It's a little aggressive, but it's not outside of criteria. So this is something we're still evaluating. And one of the things we just have to be very careful about, I have a note here, is that if we really went from waypoint 15 straight to dawn, we just have to be very careful about, Class B boundaries and other established sectors that NCT has drawn to try to keep, the controllers that work on Oakland traffic working just Oakland, and the folks that work on SFO traffic just working on SFO. So there's some refinement we have here, but we think this is a good candidate, and we'd like to take it forward as a Group 2A option. I'm just gonna, let me just pause here. Chair Hindi or Kathleen, I'm happy to pause here if you'd like to see if there's questions, or I'm also happy to keep going. Which would you prefer?
Let me check if there's any questions. I think that instead of going back and forth on your slide, but let's see, any members of the Roundtable Technical Working Group or otherwise have any questions for Paul?
None for me right now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member O'Connell. Let me see if I see any hands. I see none. Mr. Hanna, please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. Just want to make sure.
Thank you for checking.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to share, so I want to make sure we get all the feedback possible here. So the next slide I have is the 2A concept. Again, I'm using the term right there at the top of the slide called Bodega West. I think that's a term that's maybe been used here with this roundtable 2BG in the past. That's not the official name of the maneuver, but it represents aircraft that take the bodega arrival and then are currently, given vectors that basically start coming overhead the San Francisco International Airport, and then aircraft connect in to various points along the approaches a bit further away from the airport, typically over the water still. And the suggestion was to, I think, find a way to create an instrument approach procedure. So create an initial approach path that brings aircraft from that arrival, again, at high altitudes as possible, and then safely connects them back up to that RNP Yankee or the GLS uniform path, so that most of the descending and configuration of the aircraft could be done in the overwater suggestion. This is actually something that our flight procedures subcommittee discussed. We've been discussing it over the last couple of years, and it's something that we even were exploring as recently as last quarter to see if this could be a Group 2A concept. So it's either great minds think alike or desperate times call for desperate measures. But many of us on the subcommittee were exploring this, and what we found is that there's kind of two challenges with making an instrument approach procedure for the Group 2A timeline for any kind of approach that connects to bodega that comes down this side, of the airspace. And the main challenge is that many of the aircraft that come into the airport, certainly under high traffic periods, are heading for runway 28 right. And today the arrival stream when they're using the bodega, at least on the west-hand side, or on the west side, it's being done to create that separation for two aircraft to potentially land on the left-hand runway and the right-hand runway. In an ideal world, if there wasn't much traffic for aircraft coming on the bodega arrival, again, ideally, those aircraft are going to be on the new down the bay approach, ideally, right? Because then those aircraft aren't going to be flying over any of the cities. They're going to be primarily over the water. So in this world where we're looking at the bodega, coming down the west-hand side, this would be used in a situation where you've got two different aircraft, one that needs to potentially land on 28 left or one that needs to land on 28 right. And the challenge is that today, the only way to create that separation safely is to start giving vectors to aircraft that are on this track, the one that's shown here on the screen. And as soon as an aircraft starts getting vectors, they're not on the instrument approach anymore. And this is one of our big challenges, is if we create an instrument approach that tries to even match up with the vector track, as soon as the aircraft starts receiving vectors, it could be an altitude, it could be a heading, it could be a speed, we're no longer, that aircraft is no longer on the approach procedure. And the most logical place for that aircraft to catch the approach procedure again is kind of back here at guts. So to make sure that NCT has maximum flexibility to safely keep those aircraft separated, there currently just isn't a lot of value that was identified by the subcommittee to trying to make a procedure. Now, in the future, there could be some very interesting opportunities to look at this again. So we don't want to forget about this concept necessarily. I think it's a great suggestion. The subcommittee agrees. It's just as it stands today, the workflow and the separation for this approach, and the goal of it, I think it's probably a 2B or a group 3 concept. So this is something that for now, I think we're probably going to put it into that 2B bucket and come back and explore it again in the future. Not too distant future, we hope. But one of the things that came out of this conversation with some of our subcommittee members is that if the goal of this concept, of this suggestion, was to try to get more aircraft to use the RMP Yankee path at nighttime, right? Because again, this is most likely vectors that's coming in this area, but the goal is to get that aircraft out to Guts and Dong and come in this way. That's something we could look at under that increased utilization phase to make sure that this really is a good and quiet path and make sure that it works, and then evaluate it that way. So we're going to talk about that again a little bit later in the presentation. I'm going to keep going unless there's a question or a hand up or something like that.
Okay, I don't see any. Please go ahead.
Great, thanks, Chair Handy. So the second suggestion, 2B, this is the second suggested procedure that we would like to take forward to explore for Group 2A for noise analysis. Again, the concept is to see if under kind of potentially lower traffic periods, if those aircraft that are coming in from Surfer in particular, so Eddie side-by, could start heading out over water to complete the rest of their kind of descent and configuration and speed management. We're looking at this as kind of like a slight modification to the GLS uniform that's being developed right now. And the idea here is that the current turn kind of for the GLS uniform, and I've got a slide right after this that'll show you the comparison. It occurs, closer to side-by, right here. And I think this is basically over Palo Alto, if not East Palo Alto. And the idea would be to potentially delay that turn a little bit until the aircraft crosses closer to Highway 84 and then makes the turn out over the water, which would basically put it closer to a waypoint called Shira, which is used for the tiptoe visual right now. We took a look at this in targets and GPD. It's absolutely possible to look at this as a GLS procedure. And so we figured we'd bring it forward. And here on slide 9, we just kind of wanted to show how we're thinking about it. And again, we've got another subcommittee meeting coming up, so we're going to be getting a lot of feedback from our subcommittee members about how exactly we'd like to try to do this one. But I wanted to give some perspective to the participants here today. The light blue line that you see is the kind of ILS and GLS path to 28 left, just to lay it out there. So you side-by to He-Man kind of heading on into runway 28 left. And there is currently a charted visual flight procedure called the tiptoe to runway 28 left, which goes side-by. And then there's a waypoint called Shira, and then there's other waypoints. I don't think this waypoint has a name just yet. And I'm not going to get into the technicalities. I'm happy to answer if you're interested, but it will have a name here shortly. On the 30th by the 30th of November, it will have a name. But it goes side by Shira, and then it basically intercepts the GLS with ILS into the remainder of the runway. I've shown the historical point, which still exists, which is Menlo, kind of right here, just to give some perspective. And then on the other side, you see these lines that head towards Guts. That's the existing ground or lateral path for the RMP Yankee or the GLS uniform. Now, you'll see blue lines and you'll see red dashed lines. The blue line is what happens if you just connect the dots. Like if you're looking at an instrument procedure page and you said, what am I seeing here? I'm seeing a bunch of names and lines connected together. The red dashed line is the nominal ground track of where the FAA's targets platform thinks the aircraft is going to go if it's navigating kind of between those points. So even though it's a straight line, it's like the blue line is literally just line segments. It's anticipated that an aircraft that goes from, for instance, Side-by to Shira to this other waypoint, it's gonna anticipate that turn and fly by the waypoint. This is why we call them fly-by waypoints. So it makes the left turn and it kind of tracks a little bit to the west of Shira. For the RNP Yankee, there's a very, very slight turn. So it flies just to the kind of southeast of Side-by, heads out over the water, but then based on the angle of how Guts and the next segment towards Dong are connected, there's a big anticipated track today. So you see this red line kind of deviate away from the blue line significantly. And that's just how, it's one potential path for how an aircraft could fly that. We're interpreting this suggestion to basically follow the yellow dashed line. So to stay on the existing track that would normally be between Side-by and He-Man, and then at Highway 84, start the turn over the water to try to kind of get back towards the RNP Yankee path. So one of the things we can do by the introduction of this kind of wobbly little curve here is we can potentially gain some altitude if we are backing up on the approach. So if we back up to Side-by and we back up to Eddy, it is possible to increase the altitudes. And for this particular approach, we're looking at altitudes that could go as high as 7,000. When we're crossing Eddy. Again, I'm just kind of sharing some tentative information. When the CFPPs come out, those will be the values that we'd like everybody to take a look at in more detail. So I'm just kind of going forward. The next suggestion from this group is looking at trying to connect an approach procedure to the Pirate. And this was a very interesting conversation with some of our subcommittee participants. So the first thing I want to point out about the Pirate Star is that at the moment it's currently not being used. And I think it's not being used due to previously expressed concerns from the community that were shared with the FAA. And so I think that Pirate Star has actually been deactivated. So we're kind of imagining that this suggested procedure is in a world, hopefully not too far away, where the Pirate procedure is optimized and it's reactivated. And you could connect an approach procedure. Unfortunately, we ran into the same challenge that we did with like the Bodega West, which is that the way that aircraft are currently vectored onto or cleared onto the Pirate Star to then connect at a rather acute angle onto some of the approach options here at SFO almost always results in some kind of vectoring, either for headings or for some kind of speed change or altitude changes. And there was a big concern expressed by the subcommittee that if we tried to make an approach procedure in Group 2A that connected to the Pirate, the likely outcome is that aircraft would not stay on the approach for long. And that kind of defeats our goal of trying to, because if we make an approach that we think is going to generate a great noise benefit, but then all that's happening is the aircraft are being vectored off it, it's not likely to be terribly successful. And so the feedback we got here is that, if the Pirate Star winds up being reactivated in the future, which there was a lot of interest from the subcommittee participants and seeing if that could be undertaken, that maybe we could look at making instrument approach procedures that connect to that Pirate Star is a part of 2B, or maybe 3 at the worst case, but 2B potentially. I wanted to pause there. That's kind of the two questions. Any questions yet so far?
I don't see any, but let me just make a quick note, because last time I think I just asked if any roundtable member, but if also staff, anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Okay, I see none. Mr. Hanna, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that. So the next suggestions, there's 3 suggestions which are very similar to the 2. So we had like a 2A, which is like a trying to do a Bodega West to a more overwater position. We had a Surfer to a slightly more overwater position, and then we had Pirate to a more overwater position. The Group 3, the suggestions for 3A, B, and C are like more aggressive paths. See, it's kind of like, how much further over the water can we take those aircraft, and can it be done a little bit earlier so that we can, working backwards, get more altitude over the areas where people are living and working. And so the first one, I'm actually jumping to 3B, and it's because 3A and 3C, we're still running into the same problems, but 3B we'd also like to explore as part of Group 2A. So 3B is, previously the recommendation was, follow the track to get to Highway 84 and then make your way out to kind of somewhere in the guts area, but make sure that you get back to dawn. This one is a bit more aggressive in terms of, let's see how far we can get the aircraft out over the water and kind of work our way backwards. So I'm just going to show what this looks like on this particular graphic. So previously, and I'm happy to jump back and forth in the package if that's useful, we were talking about, a rather slight path where the aircraft was first, I'm moving my mouse, hopefully folks can see it, very close to the waypoint where shear is. We're kind of staying very close to that. And then the aircraft is making like a bit of an S-turn to head out over the water first and then get to guts. This one is an exploration of something more aggressive, just in terms of getting the aircraft out over the water. So the challenge here, though, just from an instrument procedure design perspective, is that there's two ways to execute these kinds of turns. One is to put down a bunch of flyby waypoints, which is like using, I don't want to get it. It's a universally available navigation method for both GLS and non-GLS capable airplanes. The other way to do it is to make these what are called radius to fix segments, which are that's a PBM maneuver, an RMP maneuver. The good news is that the aircraft that are GLS capable, that are coming into San Francisco now and in the future, they can do either. So we have a couple of options we need to review as a subcommittee about how we want to do this. But the trick is that if we're following this blue line and we want to try to get the aircraft to make the turn over the bridge before it heads out over the water and then comes back to the remainder of the procedure, it's very difficult to actually stay on the blue line all the way to Highway 84 before we make the turn. So one of the things that we're exploring right now is, let's say that the turn, obviously aircraft stay on the path until side by, and then they start that turn. We do not want to introduce noise into new areas. And we understood that was a strong assertion from your suggestion as well, that you do not want to introduce noise in new areas where it's not currently there. So we're trying very hard to find a track that takes that anticipated aircraft path and keeps it, inside of where aircraft are already being experienced today, between the RMP Yankee GLS uniform path here or like the tiptoe here. So that's something that we're working through, and we're looking forward to seeing how that officially turns out for the February publication and the March review. So the same concept again, just moving on to look at 3A and 3C. This was looking at more aggressively seeking an overwater path. We run into the same challenges again, that if NCT is being asked to use an instrument approach procedure version of it, it's very likely the aircraft are going to be popped off the instrument approach procedure, which means it's not that valuable anymore as a 2A. So these would be 2B or 3 concepts just based on technology. There were some other great suggestions, and now we're going to get into the remainder of those suggestions that have. The first two, the first one I want to talk about here is kind of what we term as a new arrival procedure during southeast flow. And the way that our subcommittee interpreted the suggestion is there are some aircraft to achieve proper separation and sequencing for aircraft that are both landing on Oakland runway 12 in southeast flow and the aircraft landing here at San Francisco on the 19s. There are some aircraft that in that operation basically head right over, much of the peninsula, certainly downtown San Francisco, before they make their way in. And the suggestion was to look at a different way to sequence those aircraft, to keep them over the water and then coming in over the Golden Gate Bridge before they make their way in. Unfortunately, so it's a great suggestion. It's currently beyond the GBAS project scope to do this particular suggestion. And the reason why is because much of the change that would be necessary for this to occur resides with a different air traffic stakeholder group entirely than the ones that are participating in our GBAS flight procedure subcommittee, which the difference there is it's Oakland Center. So, we have great participation from the tower, several towers in some cases, here in the Bay Area, and the TRACON, but we don't have a lot of participation from Oakland Center because that starts to get beyond the scope of our GBAS project looking at approaches. So we wanted to just bring this back to you, that if this is something that you all at the SFO Roundtable Technical Working Group are interested in pursuing, that it would be raised with the Community Engagement Officer, which is Alana, who I think might be on the call here tonight. We are going to continue as a GBAS project team to look at opportunities for approach procedures that might be able to do this. But right now, we would be looking at group 3 for the ability to go after approaches that basically stay over the Golden Gate before they hook into 19 right in particular. And that's because we have to wait for a more, a more mature version of the multiple airport route separation operation to come into existence. It's just coming into existence now. It's first form. We're a couple of years away before we think we could have that kind of automated separation to be supported by the GBAS project. So for this suggestion, if you're interested, I think you would have to go through the CEO separate from the GBAS project for now. The next procedure has a similar outcome, I think. Our flight procedure subcommittee folks took a look at this one. A very interesting suggestion. It is, I'd say 90% of the decision-making over whether something like this could be done, which is to change the southeast arrival stream. Right now there are 2 major arrivals that are used for Oakland and San Francisco. One is the EMZO coming into Oakland, and then obviously Surfer coming into San Francisco. And the idea would be that under the right traffic conditions, look at that possibility that maybe more aircraft could be merged over EMZO and then kind of split off. Very creative, very interesting suggestion. 90% of that lies with Oakland Center, which again is beyond our GBAS project scope, unfortunately. So again, if this is something you're interested in pursuing, the suggestion from the subcommittee participants was to take this through the community engagement officer. The last suggestion is this one here, which is what we term kind of a dual offset approach to 28 left and 28 right. Again, great creative suggestions, and we absolutely see, the thought process that went on here to find opportunities to reduce noise even under kind of these higher traffic periods. And we started to discuss this. Actually, we've been discussing this as a subcommittee now for about, I'd say, since the outset of the GBAS project. So please don't take the news I share with you today as a statement that this will never ever happen. But right now, where we are with these kinds of conversations is that there are some other challenges that have been happening where you have 2 approaches where both of them are kind of not yet aligned with the runway when they get relatively close. So in this case, we're talking about inside of about 5 miles of the runway. And so the suggested procedure here is, you've got a blue path that's, the heading for 28 right. You've got a green path that's heading for 28 left. There are similar concepts that have been explored at 2 other airports in the NAS where this is what was being looked at, and they're getting lots of TCAS problems. And TCAS is the traffic collision avoidance system that's built into the airplanes themselves. And again, not a San Francisco problem yet. Like San Francisco today, we don't really have the same significance of these problems due to years of all stakeholders working together and fantastic training and technology, for NCT and RFA stakeholders. But at some other airports where they tried to do something like this, they're getting significant TCAS problems. And the FAA is currently exploring how to best resolve these kinds of situations so that maybe this can come up again in the future. So right now, we have to wait on this particular kind of concept until the FAA completes its safety studies and comes back to us with more insight on how it can be done. So this is unfortunately going to happen after Group 2A, which means if we want to explore this, it's more like a 2B concept. So I know I've said a lot of information about the concepts, but again, this is what it shakes down. So we are planning to take that down the bay to RMP Yankee and look at it as a Group 2A. And we're going to look at what we call like a slight modification and a significant modification to the RMP Yankee and the GLS uniform. Turn those into community flight procedure packages, which means we do the noise analysis, we put the flight track out there, we do the 3-dimensional pieces. We're also going to put those on the noise.flysfo.com website, just like we did before, so you can explore the SEL contours interactively for the 4 aircraft types and seek your feedback. But before I move on to the next phase, Chair Hindi, are there any questions or comments before I go into the next phase?
Let me check. I personally do not, and I don't see any raised hands. With that, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. So with all that in mind, so we've kind of identified that there's 3 procedures that we see here in the Group 2A concept for exploration, which is kind of our innovate and improve phase. So again, originally we're talking about like higher altitudes. In some cases, there's some very technical things where we're looking at trying to get to GLS Cat 2 capabilities. And what we're going to be coming back to all of you with is more than just the 3 procedures that you have very kindly suggested to us. I mean, 10, but the 3 that we would like to take forward is 2A. And on page 20, you can see what we're planning to turn into CFPPs coming up. So we are going to be looking first and foremost at GLS Cat 2 procedures, one of them to 2.8 right and one of them to 19 left. Again, Cat 2 approaches, our flight procedure subcommittee is working from the assumption that they have to be identical to the existing, ILS approach that's on the runway. So these are not necessarily opportunities for altitude gains. These are really looking at like our secondary goals of ILS redundancy and reducing delays. So we're gonna, but we want to stay true to our process and put those into CFPPs and put them out there for all of you to comment on. There's one procedure I do not have graphics here for you today, which we do plan to talk about in March, which is a new approach to runway 19 left, which we're calling just tentatively the side-by approach to 19 left. This is an existing vector track that is used extensively by NCT that gives them a safe kind of alternate path for bringing aircraft into 19 left. It involves a more significant overflight of the east side of the bay. And we're just working here as an SFO project team on how to achieve that outreach, perhaps with the Oakland Noise Forum and residents that live on that side as well. But we will be putting that on the website in February and plan to talk with you all about it in March. And then the three procedures we talked about here today, which we're just tentatively giving names to, which is the DBN or down the bay kind of new, and then Overwater 1 and Overwater 2, which is kind of the slight path and then the more aggressive path. What we're planning on doing for those is right now the GLS DBN, which is that more kind of that's the down the bay procedure where maybe we connect it to the RMP Yankee. We view that as a variation potentially to the GLS Whiskey, which is again being produced and published for the 30th of November this year. We recognize that perhaps in the future, like as a Group 2A concept, when it's published, it might be like the nighttime version of the down the bay approach. Perhaps it needs to be explored a little bit. The other two that we're looking at though are definitely variations to the GLS uniform. And the idea here is that, we as a flight procedure subcommittee kind of view the existing RMP Yankee procedure as like a great first step at a nighttime noise abatement approach. There are other potential applications for it, but I think that's when it has its highest opportunity for utilization, is those low traffic periods. So when we're looking at more aggressive over water opportunities, what we're thinking about as a subcommittee is a future opportunity to maybe update, like upgrade or replace kind of like the existing RMP Yankee with these procedures. Maybe this is the best way to try to reduce noise in those nighttime hours because of what the path the aircraft has to take, and the fact that an aircraft taking that path can only happen when there's not many other aircraft out there. It can't be used, unfortunately, at a high traffic period. And I think your suggestions suggested the same thing. But one of the important things we want to point out to all of you is that when we produce our community flight procedure packages, at least our first versions, we have to figure out something to compare the Group 2A procedures against. Because when we generate the graphic you see here on the right, that is a comparison of the single event noise that we calculate for the new concept compared to the single event for an existing concept. And so what we wanted to just let you know is right now we are planning to produce the CFPPs so that the new down the bay, or the more aggressive one, is going to be compared to the down the bay approach that is about to be published on the 30th of November. And the Overwater 1 and 2 concepts are both going to be compared to the GLS uniform, which is also being worked on for the 30th of November. So I realize that might seem a little technical, but what it basically means is the procedure on the left is going to be one of the new GLS procedures, and the procedure on the right is going to be the Group 2A concept. There is some method to that because it's possible that is, and certainly the case for the Overwater 1 and 2, that if these procedures ultimately are ultimately found through evidence from the noise measurement process and through public feedback to be the best solutions, then they are likely to outright replace the GLS uniform because it's just a better, quieter path. And I think that's maybe what we all want. Which takes us to the last thing I want to talk about, which is going after increased utilization. So here on slide 23, we're talking about our opportunity for and how we're going to explore increasing utilization. So we've talked about it in our strategic plan before. There's 3 things we really want to do to increase GLS utilization. If that approach is meeting our project goals, we do not want to increase utilization of something that is not achieving our project goals. That is a terrible idea. So increased utilization could be finding ways to use that approach more during VFR conditions, which is something we've talked about a bit. It could be increasing nighttime utilization through something like updating the letter of agreement with NCT and SFO Tower. It could also mean conversion into like an ARNP style approach, which is a newer nav spec that the FAA is about to come out with, that has come out with, excuse me, but will more broadly be applicable for public procedures. That would create an opportunity for both GLS aircraft and non-GLS aircraft to fly that procedure. But we don't want to do that until we are certain, to the best of our ability, and we've gotten the public feedback that this is the right decision to increase utilization of these approaches. One of the key things is that if we, as a project team, or if we get feedback that this is a good idea to convert a GLS approach to ARNP, we as an airport can no longer unilaterally deactivate that procedure. So one of the things we've talked about in the past is when we use a GBAS, which is currently an airport-owned nav aid, to make an innovative approach. If we find that it's not meeting our project goals, we can deactivate that approach and tell the FAA that that was our decision. Now we have to coordinate it, but I mean, it can be done relatively quickly. If we ask for a GLS procedure to become ARNP, and now there's other ways for aircraft to fly that procedure, the airport loses that ability to turn it off. That doesn't mean it couldn't be turned off if there was significant reason to do that, or safety reasons, of course. But it just takes much longer, and it becomes a more complicated path to get there. So we want to make sure that if we're going to make that decision in the future to convert a good GLS approach into ARNP, that we do it with a lot of rigor. So the next 2 slides I have is kind of a process slide, just to let folks know. So this first slide here kind of shows how we are thinking about increasing utilization. So this is the flow that we want to show of what happens if we have a GLS procedure that's published by the FAA, which starts here on the left. We start collecting that data. We're looking at how it's being used, how it's being flown. We're getting feedback from air traffic. We're getting feedback from the airlines, right? So we're evaluating, is it working? Is it safe to use? Is it achieving our goals? And one of those ways of making sure it achieves our goals is to evaluate the noise monitoring reports, like Christian talked about in the beginning. We have our portable noise monitors that get deployed. We gather the information, we compare, we review that feedback with all of you. But critically, one of the first things we need to do is we need to ask our flight procedures subcommittee if they think it's a good idea to increase the utilization of something, because they're the user group. And if they say no, well, that's probably not a great idea. Because they know something about that procedure, about why it can't be used more, or maybe that it needs to be modified. So we take all of that data, we go to our flight procedures subcommittee and we ask them the question, should we do this? Should we convert it to ARNP? Should we apply it to the nighttime LOA? If they say yes, we will then take that procedure back to this group, which may be one of several, depending on where the procedure is and how it's being used. And conduct that public review and make that and try to put the decision into your hands as well, so that you all can answer the question, should this procedure that is meeting its project goals on this particular discussion stay at GLS because you're not certain yet, maybe you think it needs more data, or is it time to convert it to ARNP to get more aircraft to use it? Or is this something where we want to update an LOA? Because this spike, we've done our kind of hard work as a flight procedure subcommittee. Now we want to give you the data to make that decision as well before we convert it. If it doesn't work, this is the process we'd like to follow. So if we have put out the procedure, we're looking at the noise monitoring reports, it is not meeting our project goals. Well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to confer with the flight procedure subcommittee. And we do that because maybe the procedure is not meeting its project goals, but it's something very technical. It's not perhaps noise related. It's not necessarily ILS redundancy related, but there's like there's an efficiency problem somewhere. And we've got a suggestion from one of our subcommittee members to say, you know what, if you just tweaked it a little bit, we think it'd be better. A tweak to a procedure is a modification. And we are going to handle those modifications through the community flight procedure package process. So we will look at that process. We will produce the CFPPs. It will go back for public review, just like we're doing right now with our Group 2A procedures. That's the process we'd like to follow. However, if we get a lot of data and it is not looking good, or if we get feedback from the public that says, you know, this is just not working, then we're gonna take that to the subcommittee again to discuss, just to make sure that this is the right path. If that decision is suspend, we'll work with the FAA and we'll notify the public that it's gonna be suspended. So you'll see here that there is an opportunity here, even if the subcommittee believes that something could be modified to enhance it. If the public does not, it's a suspension. That GLS procedure will be suspended. So I hope this is kind of informative to let you all know this is the process we're currently planning to work towards in terms of identifying those GLS procedures that we think work very well and enhancing them. And the main reason here why we wanted to chat about this is we are, and this is maybe like the last thought I'd like to leave it all, which is that the FAA has, as I've stated here, demonstrated just an outstanding willingness to achieve the airport's project goals and working, you know, with us and certainly with members of the public in the past and present and future to find ways, you know, in particular for these innovative GLS procedures, right? But there's some practical limits on just how many public GLS procedures can be maintained and used per runway. Some of that is that, you know, the GBAS itself, we can only put 40 procedures in there, so we can't make an infinite number of variations. And by the end of Group 1 implementation, we're going to have a lot of approach procedures, in particular to runway 28 right. And the more approach procedures you have to a runway, the more complicated things get for our air traffic and our airline stakeholders. So we want to make sure that, you know, as we look towards the future and these innovative concepts, that we're identifying the best ones. And if we're finding perhaps Group 2A concepts that are better than our Group 1 concepts, that we replace one with the other when the time is right and when we know that we found that to be acceptable. So as we put our CFPPs out there and look for feedback on Group 2A, that's what we want to have people keep in mind is take a look at those Group 2A packages when they come out in February, not only for what's acceptable for use, but what might be preferred. Like if you see two, like the version where we're going a little bit over water and the version that we're going a lot over water, if one of them, when you look at the noise information and everything looks better to you, we'd like that feedback as well, in addition to whether or not it's acceptable to proceed. So just a reminder here for our next steps, we are going to be publishing the 2A concepts as community flight procedures. We will be back in March, the March meeting for the equivalent of this technical working group to discuss and walk through with that. We then like to gather that public feedback again, if you're seeing CFPPs that look acceptable and if there's a preference, from the March through December timeframe. And the reason why we'd like to try to cap things off in December, if we can, is we want to kind of keep the project moving forward. It takes years for the FAA to do their own NEPA analysis and development of these approach procedures. So the longer we go, the longer it's going to take to get there. And we think some of these 2A concepts might be very beneficial. They might meet our project goals, and we'd like to get them moving if it's possible. So again, just one last slide here, kind of looking at the critical phasing. You've heard me mention a couple times before, Group 1 innovative procedures are scheduled to publish on the 30th of November. As we've talked about in the past, our monitoring report is going to lag behind by about 3 months. That's partly to collect data, but that's partly to figure out who flew the GLS. That is still one of our biggest challenges, especially in visual conditions. I've talked about a great deal. I really appreciate the time. I'm here to take questions along with Christian, Bert, and Word from our side.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hanna. Definitely a lot of information, but it's very useful information. Before I turn it over to members of the roundtable and staff, if they have any questions, express my appreciation to your team and SFO, and I see Nupur is with us here as well, to her and the entire team really for being responsive and such a fast time frame. Really appreciate it. Let me see. Turn it over to members of roundtable or staff for that matter. If anybody has any technical or clarifying questions, obviously the next item we will have our discussion, but at this point I would like to take any question for Mr. Hanna or anybody else. I see Member Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. My question is as far as the mapping, have you included population over the areas? because I know some of the maps don't identify the city specifically, but you can't tell that there's residential areas. And one of the project goals is to not introduce noise in new areas. I'm concerned about the existing areas.
Thank you very much for that question. And it is a meaningful one. Our current version of the community flight procedure packages, we do have a section in the back that talks about population exposed. And if you'll bear with me for just a moment, I'm going to pull one up because if there is additional feedback or maybe additional ways that you'd like us to try to present that information, this would be a great time to get that feedback. So let me pull up one example of what we currently have, and I'm just on our noise.flysfo.com website. I'm on the GBAS tab, so folks can navigate the same way. And I'm going to pull up the what's a good interesting one. Let's pull up what was referred to as the Romeo. I'm going to download the package and I'll go to the section where we have some population information right now. So we do have a lot of information in the packages. I'll zoom in to let folks see. So what we currently present for our comparison, so we do the comparison for each of our 4 aircraft. And because there are a lot of different areas and municipalities that are being flown over by some of the proposed procedures, what we do is we show the population that is being overflown by like the 60 dB SEL contour or the 75 contour. And then we show the same information for the proposed concept. So it's existing on the left and then the proposed one on the right. And then we show the differences here. Was there some additional level of information that perhaps you were interested in seeing?
Well, yes, it sounds like the only way you identify the population is based on the noise level as opposed to just the overall existing population.
I think, Christian, correct me if I'm wrong here. I think that's a fair characterization. So I'm just going to go to one concept here.
That's correct. The procedure packages show counts of impacted or not impacted population, not in a geographic basis.
So just a follow-up question. So the total population isn't identified unless you have a certain level of noise. So it has to be, it sounds like over 60 dBL.
So in our current CFPPs, and I'm just using this graphic here, you can see this particular line that I'm moving my mouse around, like this is the 60 dB SEL contour. And then the dashed line is what the new procedure would potentially look like. And the green, the outside of the green, just to be super technical, is what the existing approach looked like, because we had an altitude change here. So the population that we were counting to come up with that comparison. So we were counting everybody that lived inside kind of the outside of this boundary here. I'm doing a bad job circling around the outside of this one here, and then everybody, and then we do a 75 comparison as well, which is for this particular example, not quite as many. When we look at wide body aircraft, 75 tends to be, pick up a few more people. Yeah.
Okay, the reason I ask is because I'm looking at the map from, I think it's 2A, and thinking about the populations in each city, in each area. So if they don't reach that noise level, that DBL, then they're technically not identified. At least that's the way I'm understanding it. And so for me, this is why it's important to have single events and not averages, because folks are getting missed. And I even look at the map from 2A. I mean, it's right over the community that I represent and a new community that is currently being built. So I bring that up because folks are not being identified, just based on the mapping, and then also because their noise level hasn't reached the noise level to be identified. And that was my only question or comment.
Well, I appreciate both the question and the comment. I think we've taken a couple notes, and we'll circle back with our team to see if there's additional ways that maybe we can focus on the population side. I don't know, Christian, if you had other thoughts or comments.
I have one other one. I'm sorry. Is it possible to have information on the cities impacted as well?
I think, sorry, Christian, I didn't know if you wanted to chime in. Go ahead.
No, I was just taking notes because there may be ways that we could identify the populations as Ms. Taylor was requesting.
Including by municipalities, is that right, Christian?
Right.
Ms. Taylor, is that what you were requesting? Basically, let's say it's flying over Menlo Park. You want to show the entire population of Menlo Park?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
We may be able to show geographically or per city a list of cities and the impacted population within each jurisdiction.
Okay. So showing the entire population really doesn't mean the entire population of that community is impacted. So you're going to kind of show that as a reference that this is the population, and then what percentage or what number is impacted. Is that correct?
Right.
It's something we'll do our best to see if we can either incorporate it into the package. The alternative, if it adds too much information to a single package, because these are designed to be, you know, one PDF that any member of the public could review, is we do have the other method of viewing information on the website itself. So that's another opportunity for us. There's as an example, I'll pull up the interactive map view. So that's another thing we could explore, is to see if there's additional information that we put here into these areas, perhaps for population.
Okay, let me ask Member Taylor a clarifying question. Member Taylor, are you interested in having the entire, I mean, obviously the population of any city is published and available. Are you asking the question because you want to kind of include those who are hearing the noise or getting the noise, but above or below that certain 65 level?
Yes.
So you're really not, it doesn't matter. It's not like you want to per se say Menlo Park has whatever 1,000 of population. Is more who is getting the noise at different level, no matter what the level. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Chair Handy. That's
So
exactly right.
Know.
So
Thank
yes,
you. I don't know.
So I'm not looking at the overall population. I'm looking at the population of the area impacted.
Of Menlo Park, or
yes,
of East Palo Alto, or of, yeah.
Or Redwood City, because there's unincorporated areas.
Okay.
So I didn't mean to jump in. I was just interpreting your answer that way.
You're fine. I mean, that's what we're having a discussion here. So I appreciate everybody's input. Feel free. Okay. Anybody else? Thank you, Member Taylor, for your questions and comments. Anyone else have any questions for Mr. Hanna or his team? Okay, I don't see any. I do have a question. I think, Mr. Hanna, you mentioned like you will, your team will do the noise analysis, and I'm wondering how long would that take? Over what period of time would you analyze the noise and to determine if that is enough data for you, basically, to determine if this is creating more noise or not?
Yeah, so Chair Hindi, if I understand your question, are you asking, so we were talking about the increased utilization and this phase here where we're collecting operations information and we're evaluating, how long would it take us to kind of go through this spiral before we can make these conclusions and proceed with the decision tree? Is that the question you're asking?
Correct.
Christian, did you want to maybe take that question?
Sure. So the plan is to measure noise levels for non-GLS approaches and GLS approaches to make a fairly solid conclusion, meaning about a 90% confidence level of whether the GLS procedures is being performed the way we expect. We hope to get at least, at minimum, 30 good GLS approaches per procedure per aircraft type. Now we've looked at the utilization right now of the GLS overlays, and by far the Delta Boeing 737-900 is being flown or is utilizing GLS approaches. And by tracking the monthly data that we receive, That could be for the 737-900. They're flying about 30 to 40 GLS approaches per month. So we'll have to extract the GLS approaches done by that aircraft per procedure and establish 30 good approaches. How long will that take? Perhaps maybe a month or two to get a good established procedure and compare those to the non-GLS approaches.
Thank you very much.
But something else that we're doing, sorry to interrupt. Once these procedures are implemented, on day one, we'll use ANOMS to monitor on a day-by-day basis. We'll be monitoring. So we don't have to wait 30 days or 60 days to start looking at these procedures. Once they go live, we'll start monitoring them right away, and also collecting data for non-GLS approaches. So we'll have that baseline of non-GLS approaches, and there's so many of them that we'll be able to have those 30. We'll have probably hundreds of 737-900s to compare to the GLS approaches by that aircraft. But we'll be able to, on a daily basis, look at, say there were 3 approaches that were done the first day. We'll be able to look at those individually and see if those approaches were done as expected.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Valdez and Mr. Hanna. Okay, anybody else, staff, members of the roundtable, have any questions before we thank you again? We appreciate you being here. With that, let me move on then to open it up for members of the public for comments on item number 3, which is the presentation that we just heard. Ms. Montes?
Thank you, Chairman. I do see one hand raised from Ms. Darlene Yapley.
Several mentions of updating existing nighttime LOAs. Can SFO publish those LOAs? Page 33, GBAS system maximum 40 procedures. Previously, I believe it was 48. Is this a typo or what's changed? Looking at the limitation at a quick glance, it looks like there's a heavy weighting towards GBAS 28 right. 70% or 28 of the items are 28 right. Only 1 is 28 left and 3 are 19 left right. 28 right does not really reduce mid-pen noise. To support transparency, decision-making, and fairness, can you publish a chart showing which communities are benefiting with GBAS procedures, overlays, group 1, group 2A considered, runways, right, left, 19 and 28, list the cities potentially benefiting, and what is the expected usage? For example, Diamond Archie, how many planes overfly Foster City at day and night? And the question is about 2A, are you also going to do SEL and LMAX information as well as flap deployment data? For group 2A, is it correct that SFO will consider both input overall and recommendations that will be submitted to the FAA from cities and the public who are not members of the roundtable? To do this, we need deadlines for submitting input and recommendations. The documents 26 and 29 are implementation schedules, not submission deadlines. SFO, can you make this content more accessible for non-industry experts? For example, what's GLS, CSPR, autopilot to touchdown? Page 35 is a development schedule and roundtable meetings. It's not submission deadlines. Lastly, Pirate is still active, so maybe we have a terminology question. Is it the star arrival that ends over Woodside or the 060 heading for vectoring after the end of the star, or something else?
Thank you, Ms. Yapley. And Chairman, we do not have any more hands raised for this item.
Thank you, Ms. Montes and Ms. Yapley, for your questions. Paul, if you're able and willing to answer any of those questions, feel free to address them.
Willing to, yes. And Ms. Yapley, if it's possible, I know our team was scrambling to write them down as fast as we can. We do want to answer all of them to the best of our ability. I think, oh my goodness, I might have to take them back and either answer them in the next TWG or put them up on our questions and answer section on the
Yeah, if you
website.
don't mind,
Sorry, go ahead, Bert, go ahead.
we'll go ahead and it's a staccato burst there. So trying to make sure we got it all straight and answer those, and we'll get them up on the Q&A site pretty soon. We're right now having the last group reviewed, so we should have a quick turn on it. And I'm sorry we missed your initial question, Ms. Yapley, at the meeting. That's in that group that is sitting for a review right now.
Thank you. No, that's understandable. Appreciate that. And we'll look forward to your answers. Thank you so much. Anybody else? Thank you. So I don't see any other members of the public raising their hands. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close the public comment. Again, thank you, Mr. Hanna and your team, Mr. Valdez and everybody else. And we're going to go ahead and move on to our item 4, which is a discussion of the initial feedback on SFO Roundtable suggested GLS procedure. I believe Ms. Wentworth gonna go ahead and share a screen with us showing the chart of the GBES suggestions.
If it's, I can do that, or we can use Mr. Hannah's chart if it's
Hannah's
already,
chart.
yeah,
Okay,
page
no
5.
problem. Paul, could we bother you with
The
that,
chart
please?
matrix on page 5. Paul.
Yes, one moment, share screen
Thank you.
and page.
You can just, yeah.
5 and full screen. There you go.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for doing that. So now it is time for our members to go ahead and have a discussion about these and discuss the next steps that we would like to take. Anyone has any comments? Obviously, the green, as Mr. Hanna had mentioned, the green highlighted our roundtable suggestion, which will continue to be processed by the GBES team. The 4 white roundtable suggestions are saved and reviewed for consideration by the GBES team at a later step of the GBES program. And the 3 yellows are at this point suggestions that are beyond the GBES team project scope and currently prohibited due to an FAA issue elsewhere in the national airspace. And just as a reminder, with us here for this discussion is Mr. Gene Reindell, our technical consultant, as well as Mr. Paul and his GBES team are still with us if there's any question that might come up during the discussion. With that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for the staff, members of the roundtable, if you have any questions.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Yes, Ms. Wentworth.
Since we do have these nice color-coded categories for the various suggestions, it might be good to take it in clumps. And so if anybody has any discussion about the green ones, and then if anybody has any discussion on the white and then the yellow, and if there's more, and what they might consider as next steps from staff, TWG, or the roundtable to the GBAS team, and for the yellow ones beyond the GBAS team, because the yellow ones we may want to consider going to the FAA or some other entities to pursue those.
Okay, that's great suggestion. Thank you so much, Ms. Wentworth. So the green, obviously, that are going to continue to be analyzed and processed at this point. Any questions or comments on those? I do not see any. Okay, how about the white procedures or the white suggestions? So basically what I'm looking for is kind of give staff direction as to what is our next step on these. I do have my own thoughts, but I wanted to see if any of you have any thoughts of how to proceed moving forward. Okay, and so then let me suggest the following. I would say let's refer the yellow items to the roundtable staff, which will probably result, we probably need to have HMMH probably with you, Kathleen, would you think, as
Absolutely.
far as on the yellow procedures or suggestions, and see where that could take us, and get in contact perhaps also with our colleagues at the FAA and see what is the next step that we need to do to pursue those. As far as the white suggestions, I think those we're going to have to continue to work with our friends in the GBAS team and SFO to see at what opportunity or what time those could be brought forward. Anybody else have any thoughts? Kathleen, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I think that's correct. I think the real question is what to do with the yellows and how we proceed, and what the timeline might be on them, what kind of cost factors it'll take for our budget to do them. I mean, there's a lot of questions I think we can ask, and I think Mr. Reindell will be a great source, and I think the FAA probably could answer a lot of questions for us too. So I think we're happy to do the research and come back to you with it, I guess.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think as a first step, our team staff and Mr. Reindell, the consultant, need to kind of talk a little bit about this and report back to the roundtable or to the technical working group and let us know what do you suggest and what is the next step.
Yes, I expect that any of the yellow solutions will be on a longer time frame than some of these. So we'll look at steps and timeline. Yeah.
Yeah, and as far as the green, there's nothing really that we need to do at this point. SFO is receptive, and they're going to continue to explore it further and do further analysis, right?
As far as I know, and unless Paul has any other thoughts on anything you need from the TWG today.
No additional thoughts at this time. My only ask is it possible for our team to come back in March after we publish the CFPPs to chat with you once again?
You're always welcome.
Well,
We'll plan on.
I appreciate that. I understand that may not always be the case, but we would like the opportunity to speak at the March TWG to review the CFPPs in detail at that time. So that'd be great.
No, definitely. I think that is actually important, and I appreciate that you want to check in with us at every step on the way. That is very helpful and constructive. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm sure Kathleen could make that happen, and working
absolutely.
with staff. Yeah,
it's absolutely happening. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Hanna. Okay, so regarding the whites, Paul, I think it's just whenever the time is right, we will re-engage on them.
Yes. So we've I'll just jump to a graphic really quickly. We are sorry, lots of screens or slides are flying by. So we're talking about this timeline process right now, where we're showing kind of a group 2A public engagement process that's starting for more or less now. But I think with more detail as we get into the end of Q1 and into Q2 for once the CFPPs are published and we're starting to gather feedback. Through the remainder of 2023. And we just haven't yet updated this graphic to indicate when we would start with group 2B. One of our challenges, like we've talked about before with group 2B concepts, is that there are investments that need to be made that are beyond the airport's project and budgetary capabilities. Their staffing investments, their technology investments, their headquarters level FAA investments that should be made, obviously, we think, but they're just nothing that we as an airport or project team can do. So we are continuing as an airport project team to track those technological advancements when that's the only thing that's kind of stopping us from potentially pursuing something better. And if those pop up, then I think we can start talking about group 2B. But our goal right now is to make sure that if we are going to look at something beyond 2A and beyond increasing utilization, and we're putting it in front of the public, that when it's in front of the public, we know it can actually come into existence and it can be used, because we don't want waste people's time looking at something that may or may not happen. We only want to put things out there that can genuinely be designed, published, and flown ultimately. So that's our biggest challenge right now, Chair Hindi. I think with 2B and 3 is we don't have the crystal ball to know exactly when those technology and staffing investments are going to transpire.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. Kind of helpful. Member Taylor.
Thank you, Chair Handy. I have 2 questions, and I am happy to ask the question and then take it offline. Just wanted to follow up on the chart with suggested procedure 5 and 6, if that included SAFER. That's question 1, and then I can go to the second question.
SAFER.
So the procedure, I'm sorry, for 5 and 6, and I'm asking this question because it doesn't say, which would lead to my second question. So maybe I should ask that first, if it's possible to have a chart that shows procedures, runways, in which cities are impacted. So that way it's easier to read. So, procedure 5 changes to arrivals from Southwest beyond GBAS project scope, pursue via FAA CEO request. So because I can't click it and it gives me more detail. So does this include SAFER or does it not? That's what so those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Member Taylor.
Paul,
Okay.
you're looking quizzical, Paul, and
I think I understand, but I want to make sure that you all, the way I heard the question,
please.
sorry, was just, as an example, suggestion 5, I think, and I think Member Taylor maybe has a distinct interest in surfer arrivals, if I'm interpreting it correctly. Sorry if I'm missing that one. So for instance, suggestion 5 and the packet that was submitted had more detail than what I'm showing here. This is our kind of summary of feedback, so apologies about that. But I think the concept here was because arrivals that come from like south of San Francisco, so Southern California arrivals, which is quite a few, they tend to get routed onto the surfer arrival. This one that was being suggested by the community was to explore a different routing where those aircraft would take the EMSO arrival, which is currently used for Oakland, and then to split the sequence and separate those aircraft as appropriate during kind of the right traffic times, and then have some go to SFO and some go to Oakland, thereby reducing the total numbers of arrivals that are coming on the surfer at nighttime. So sorry, Member Taylor, I think that's how I was interpreting your question about number 5. So yes, what was being recommended here, I think, was a means to reduce utilization of surfer at nighttime and put those aircraft onto a different track. And then I think your question, and I see Bert nodding his head, I may pass this to Bert really quickly. I think the suggestion here, or the question here from Member Taylor was, would this particular suggestion have any relation to surfer or relation to perhaps East Palo Alto, just to name one. And I think in principle, this concept, if it finds an opportunity to move forward for evaluation in the future, again, after other kind of safety related issues, which are very important, get analyzed and resolved by the FAA, there might be some potential benefits. But Bert, you want to jump in? Have I misstated?
No, I think you did a great job, Paul. Thank you. And I agree. The reason that the recommendation was to take it off the GBAS plate and put it over to the CEO is that's just, hey, can we, instead of using this procedure, use this procedure? That's a direct question to the FAA and not the GBAS committee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Member Taylor. Okay, before I close this item, just a reminder to members of the public, you are encouraged, and if you wish to submit a suggestion or comment to the SFO GBAS team, you may send it to sfo.gbas@flysfo.com. And this address will also be posted on the Roundtable website, which is sforoundtable.org. With that, I'm actually, let me see, I'm gonna go ahead. Let me see, I see a raised hand, Ms. Siapley. Although public comment is closed, I'm gonna go ahead and allow you to speak. Please make it brief if you can.
Thank you, Chair Hindi. I did get cut off towards the end, but I did want to say that the pirate procedure is running. So if you could clarify what you mean by it's not running, which part is not running. And I think the difficulty is not understanding the deadlines for the public. So I appreciate that you're at the roundtable meeting, you set timeframes, but you're welcoming our input and we're sending you things, but there's no timeframe that says, when do we have to get you our recommendation for a procedure? So, you know, we respectfully go through your packets and everything, but look at your slides. There is no deadline for the public to make submissions for group 2A, 2, 3, etc. So this would really help us in terms of our advance time. Thank you.
Through the chair, if I may.
Sure, please.
We had asked for any input to be done as quickly as possible every time it was put out. And no, we didn't put a specific date on it, only because we wanted to give a little latitude in there. But we did want to be sure that the inputs came in as quickly as we could get them. As you saw, the ones that are greenlit right now and going up, those are ones that were in early and they're up. So we're looking for anything we can get as quickly as we can.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to item number 5, which is the adjournment. And before we do adjourn, let me thank everybody who is with us here today and everybody who participated in asking questions, the SFO and their team. The FAA is here. Ilana, thank you for being here. I want to ask the members of the committee, Ms. O'Connor, if you have anything that you would like to put in the future meeting agenda item. I think she left, huh? She had to leave.
Yes, she had to leave early.
She had to leave.
Yes.
Okay, so any other members of the roundtable, if you would like to suggest any discussion item at a future meeting of the technical working group, is welcome. And if you think of something, you don't have anything now, if you think of something later, please reach out either to me or Kathleen, and we'll be happy to entertain. With that, thank you everyone for being here. Definitely a lot of information, but a lot of useful information. And hopefully you're able to go back and review. And if you have any further questions at a future time, you could always ask us at the roundtable meeting. Thank you very much, everyone being here. With that, we're going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.